The house smelled of sage and roasted turkey, but something rotten lingered beneath it. I stepped through the front door like a guest, not a daughter. My heels clicked on the polished wood, the same flooring my mother used to wax obsessively before hosting dinners that felt more like theater than family. The scent of sage was Helen's recipe. My grandmother's passed down, then polished to near sterility by my mother Sylvia. She appeared at the far end of the hallway, a silk scarf draped around her neck, as if she had just returned from a matinee, not prepped a meal. "Oh, Emily, there you are," she said, as if I'd wandered in by mistake. She kissed my cheek like it was a social obligation. The walls of the house hadn't changed since I left for Boston 9 years ago. Neither had the distance in my mother's eyes. "Flight okay?" she asked, already turning away. "It was fine," I replied, watching her heels disappear into the kitchen. Thanksgiving was always curated to perfection, yet every visit left a new bruise. Ryan burst down the stairs 2 seconds later, all charm and movement in sweatpants and a Patagonia hoodie. "Ems," he grinned. "Jesus, how long's it been? You look grown." I gave him a half smile. "Thanks. You look like college never ended." He laughed and pulled me into a hug that smelled like cologne and weed. "Some things never changed." "You still working for that finance company?" he asked, letting go. "I got promoted last month. Vice president, finally." Whoa. Big time. Should have known. But it was already gone from his face. He wasn't listening. His attention darted to the foyer mirror where he adjusted his hair, then back to his phone. We walked into the living room together. The fireplace was staged with fake logs. A playlist hummed soft jazz, one of Greg's favorites. My father entered with a bourbon in hand, straight-backed, starched, and already in judgment. "Emily." He said my name like a question. Not a greeting. Not warmth. "Hi, Dad." His handshake was firm, unnecessary. We weren't strangers, but maybe we were. "You flew business," I had points. He nodded, unimpressed. My success had always been inconvenient for him, acknowledged only when it could benefit his narrative. Not when it belonged to me. Sylvia re-entered holding a tray of cranberry spritzers. "Ryan's app demo is next week," she announced brightly as if I hadn't spoken. "He's pitching at 2 startups." "Oh," I turned to him. "Just a prototype," he said, feigning modesty. "Nothing major yet." "That's wonderful," I offered, voice calm. Sylvia beamed at him. "He's always had such vision. You know, Greg always said he was the entrepreneur in the family." My grip tightened around the stem of my glass. "I got recognized last week," I said. "The firm's regional head singled me out, something about stabilizing a portfolio that saved over 30 million. Silence. Greg sipped his drink. Sylvia offered a distracted smile as if I'd brought up a crossword clue. Ryan picked at his phone. No one asked a follow-up. And I understood again that this house was not for applause, unless it was aimed elsewhere. Later in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of the photo wall. Still framed Ryan's high school lacrosse trophies, his Yale acceptance letter, even a picture from his 2019 camping trip in Montana. Nothing of mine. No mention of my scholarship. No picture from my master's graduation. No photo of me and Helen. "Dinner's ready," Sylvia called. The table looked like a magazine cover, gold chargers, folded linen napkins, name cards, even though we all knew where we sat. Greg carved the turkey like a king, slicing through conquest. Ryan filled his plate like a frat boy who hadn't eaten in days. I sat across from him, my own plate untouched for minutes. So I said, "My team just landed the Ferguson portfolio. That's 60 million in assets. I got a bonus." Sylvia passed the stuffing. Greg reached for the wine. No one said a word. Then Greg cleared his throat. "Ryan, how's that new UI designer working out?" And just like that, my sentence vanished into steam. Erased. Rewritten by silence. After dinner, I excused myself early, claiming jet lag. I wasn't tired. I was suffocating. I walked upstairs slowly, feet pressing into carpet that once muffled childhood arguments. My old bedroom door was still the same painted lilac from when I was 11. I passed Greg's study on the way. The door was ajar. Inside voices. Greg's low, firm voice. Ryan's fainter. Then as I paused at the stairwell, "Your sister isn't worth a penny, she's as good as gone." I should have kept walking, but something in Greg's voice froze me in place. I stood there in the half shadow of the hallway, barely breathing. The air outside Greg's study was thick, not from the aroma of roasted herbs lingering after dinner, but from something colder, betrayal woven into words I wasn't supposed to hear. "She's out," Greg said flatly, like confirming a canceled subscription. "The trust will be rewritten. Ryan inherits the house, the assets, the business stake. No loose ends." I leaned against the wall, my palm pressed into the wood paneling, steadying myself. "She doesn't need any of it," he continued. "She has that job in Boston. She's always been independent." Sylvia's voice floated into the room, soft as chiffon. "She won't contest a pause. The sound of Greg sipping something Scotch, probably. She might, but it won't hold. She signed off years ago." Remember, Ryan's voice joined a quiet, hesitant hum. "Yeah, if it's already decided?" My teeth clenched. Already decided. The same voice that once told me, "You're strong. You don't need help," now dismissed me entirely. I backed away slowly, careful not to let the floor creak. Their words chased me down the hall like shadows, every syllable a splinter in my spine. I slipped into my room, closed the door, and stood there in the dark. It wasn't just that they didn't value me emotionally, that I could have handled. This was structural, legal, permanent. Erasure signed and sealed. I sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under my weight, softer than I remembered. Too soft, like it couldn't hold what I was about to feel. It wasn't that I needed the house or the trust. I never expected to be given anything. I'd earned every cent of my education, all while Ryan got allowances and ski trips. I remembered covering Mom's dental bill in college because Greg had a liquidity issue. I'd wired $2,000 overnight, skipping rent that month, and eating ramen for 3 weeks. They needed me when I was useful, when I was silent. But now I was being written out. I reached for my overnight bag and pulled out a sweater. At the bottom, tucked beside a journal, was an envelope I always traveled with, Grandma Helen's handwriting still crisp on the front. I opened it with trembling fingers. "For school. For you, no apologies, no strings. Love, Grandma." Inside, a copy of the check for $15,000. I had scanned and saved it years ago. She'd known. Somehow she'd known this family would choose comfort over fairness, that I'd need a separate lifeline. I remembered her hands, always cold, always clasped in mine when we walked around her garden. "Never let them tell you you're too proud," she'd whispered once. "Let them call you difficult. Just don't let them call you dependent." I closed my eyes. Sylvia's words from years ago came back, laced in scorn. That check wasn't love. It was Helen's way of driving a wedge. But now I saw it clearly. That check wasn't a wedge, it was armor. The hallway light outside my door flicked on. I froze again. Footsteps, heels. Not Greg's. Sylvia's. A soft knock on the wall. Not the door. Just a gentle, "I know you're there" gesture. Then silence. I opened the door a crack. She stood halfway down the hall. Our eyes met. She didn't flinch, didn't look away. She smiled. Not in guilt. Not even in awkwardness. It was confirmation. She had always known. And now so did I. She turned and walked away without a word, silk scarf trailing like a signature on a finished letter. Back in the guest room, I opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark, the cursor blinking like a dare. They want me erased. But I kept the receipts. Sleep didn't come. Numbers did. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the house creaked around me like it was breathing or plotting. The clock on the nightstand glowed 2:13 a.m. I hadn't closed my eyes since Greg's words slid through the hallway and sliced whatever was left of my old illusions. I pulled the comforter aside and got up quietly. My laptop was still open from the hour before. I sat down, my legs folded beneath me, fingers hovering over the keyboard. I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was calculating. Helen once said paper never lies. People do. So I went to the paper. I opened my personal financial archive, a collection I kept half out of habit, half out of a gnawing suspicion that one day I might need it. I'd scanned receipts, screenshots of Venmo transfers, wire confirmations, even old bank statements I'd pulled from the shared family login when I was still covering their emergencies. First, the obvious, I searched for transfers sent to Greg or Sylvia. The earliest was dated February 2016, $750 for Ryan's medical bill when he sprained his ankle skiing. Then another 4 months later, $1 and $200 for car repairs. Then $900 for a credit card minimum. On and on. Year after year. 7 years of being their hidden creditor. I built a spreadsheet line by line totaling every wire, every check, every gift never returned. $42,000, not including the ones I didn't label or the times I paid bills directly. Not including the groceries I had delivered when Mom had a bad week. Just the documented ones. It was staggering. Not just the money, but the audacity. That I had become their fallback plan. Their invisible ATM. Then I opened the Helen folder. I hadn't looked inside since she passed it, felt like desecration before. But now, it was salvation. I found a PDF she had sent me in 2017, her will summary. She had earmarked $25,000 each for Ryan and me. I remembered receiving it, crying, and calling her to thank her. She'd said, "It's not the amount. It's the message. You matter." Attached beneath the PDF was a screenshot of the deposit receipt. $15,000 had been wired into my personal account. That matched. I remembered that. The remaining $10,000, that was supposed to be in trust until my 30th birthday. I was 31 now. I never saw it. With mounting dread, I searched through Greg's business filings. He used my name once as a silent partner in a real estate acquisition. I remembered signing something vague after Thanksgiving 3 years ago. He'd said it was for tax purposes, just a technicality. At the time, I was half drunk on Merlot and trying to keep the peace. There it was. My name co-signed on a $120,000 loan for a failed property in Eugene. The signature looked like mine, but the date wasn't. Forged. I stared at it, bile rising. They didn't just dismiss me, they impersonated me, used me, risked my credit, my legality, and never even looked back. Scrolling deeper, I found another document, a PayPal transfer to a business account named Vision Forge Ryan's startup. $8,000. The account was linked to a joint card once opened by Sylvia and funded from what had been Helen's estate disbursement. No permission. No notice. Just taken. My hands shook, but I wasn't crying. I opened a new document, titled it, simply, Family Ledger Truth. I listed every dollar I had sent, annotated them with dates and contexts. I inserted screenshots, PDFs, highlighted texts where Sylvia had written, "Can you just spot us this once?" Greg stressed about taxes. It grew. 3 pages, 4, 5. At page 6, I began indexing how often I had been told I was too independent, not maternal, hard to love. I wasn't just documenting money, I was documenting erasure. This wasn't an accounting exercise anymore. It was proof. Of love leveraged. Of loyalty unreciprocated. Of betrayal written in bank language. Then I opened my email. Search trust document. Emily, nothing from Greg. But I found an old message from Daniel, the family's lawyer, dated 4 years ago. "Emily, per our discussion, you're listed as a contingent beneficiary, but I'd suggest reviewing this with your father directly. Contingent. In case Ryan died first, maybe page 7 of the dossier filled itself. I added a final section projected damages if my credit had taken a hit from the forged loan. I included the name of a friend at the firm who could verify the Ferguson portfolio I'd closed. I linked to my employee profile on the company website just in case. I stared at the document. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't elegant. But it was clear. I won't ask for their love, but they will see my value. On Thanksgiving morning, the house sparkled. So did the knives. Sunlight bounced off polished silver and crystal wine glasses, casting soft glows across the long mahogany dining table. Sylvia orchestrated the preparations like a seasoned general, hair perfectly pinned pearl earrings, shimmering voice sharp as ever beneath the pleasantries. I stood at the kitchen threshold watching her arrange name cards. Each guest had their assigned place, predictable, almost ceremonial. Ryan's seat was at Greg's right, mine across from the piano, distant, detached, unimportant. Greg walked in, inspecting the room like it was a company asset. He gave a small nod of approval and adjusted a framed photo on the sideboard, Ryan at his college graduation. I noticed again there was no photo of me. There never had been. Greg once called me independent. Now I know it was a dismissal, not praise. A dozen relatives arrived just after noon. Sylvia greeted them with rehearsed warmth. I smiled, shook hands, accepted comments about how grown-up I looked, how Boston must be so exciting, and deflected the subtle digs about not calling more often. Ryan soaked in the attention like a sponge, sliding through conversations with charisma I used to envy. Now it just felt like noise. Dinner began at 2 p.m., just as scheduled. The dining room filled with the scent of rosemary-baked yams and tension. Sylvia stood for a toast. "We are so proud of our Ryan," she said, raising her glass. "His vision, his ambition, it's inspiring." Greg nodded beside her. "Takes guts to pivot in today's market." I blinked. "Pivot?" Ryan chuckled. "Yeah, we're moving into crypto-integrated wellness spaces now. Hybrid model, subscription plus platform." Laughter. Head nods. One uncle clapped. Another muttered something about young people changing the game. I took a sip of wine and cleared my throat. "I actually have news too," I said. "Michael and I. We're also in talks with a VC out of Seattle." Ryan interrupted, oblivious. He loved the prototype. Said the UI was disruptive. Greg leaned in, eyes bright. "That's the future. Not clinging to old corporate structures." Sylvia beamed like it was Ryan's coronation. I looked down, my hand wrapped around the stem of my wineglass, then slowly reached beneath the table. My fingers closed around the flash drive in my coat pocket. 7 pages. Every dollar. Every signature. Every silence. My own coronation, quiet, buried for now. I didn't look at anyone as I returned my hand to my lap. Let them revel. Let them crown him. I was no longer hungry for their applause. I glanced around the table. Chatter hummed like static. Someone asked Ryan if he was seeing anyone. Someone else complimented the stuffing. No one asked about Boston. No one noticed my silence. It used to sting. Now it clarified. Flashbacks filled the empty spaces in my head, me as a sophomore, working nights at a campus coffee shop balancing textbooks and mop buckets, while Ryan crashed my dorm party in a new Mustang Greg had bought as a motivator. Sylvia had called me too sensitive when I questioned it. I should have stood up now, told them everything, laid the ledger on the table like a sacrifice, and let it bleed. Instead, I looked around at the eager faces, the wine-glazed smiles, and chose something far stronger than rage. Silence. After dessert, the guests began to leave, some carrying leftover pie in Tupperware, others promising to send photos. Sylvia stood at the door like a queen seeing off diplomats. Greg retreated to his study early, already loosening his tie. By 9 p.m., the house was quiet again. Ryan was out with friends. Sylvia had gone upstairs. I walked past the study. The door was ajar again. I paused. Greg's voice. She doesn't need it. It's already structured. Sylvia's. She's strong. She'll survive. I didn't knock. I didn't turn away this time. I whispered to myself. Low, steady final. Not anymore. Not all family secrets are buried. Some are locked in fireproof drawers. I parked outside the old downtown branch of Oregon Trust and Equity, a narrow building with green copper accents that had resisted gentrification by sheer will. Its stone facade reminded me of Helen, unshaken, elegant, and quietly immovable. Daniel was already waiting on the steps, looking smaller than I remembered. His gray coat was pressed, his shoes shined, but time had softened him. I hadn't seen him since Helen's memorial, and even then we barely spoke. He gave a cautious nod as I approached. "You're early," he said. "So are you," I replied. A flicker of a smile. Inside the lobby smelled of old paper and lemon polish. The vault door gleamed at the end of the hallway, sealed shut like a promise. Daniel cleared his throat. "You said you had something to show me?" I opened my leather folder, slid out a set of printed documents, and laid them across the small conference table in the consultation room. Bank transfers, screenshots, the trust summary, the forged loan. He examined each one slowly, his expression tightening. "And this," I added, unfolding a notarized email from Helen dated 2 months before her death. "She told me she left something under my name. She said no one else could open it." Daniel leaned back. "Emily, you know your father's position. His authority over the estate is compromised," I interrupted. "Greg forged a business loan under my name. Sylvia used Helen's inheritance to fund Ryan's startup. And if I'm right, the trust was altered post-mortem." Daniel didn't speak. His fingers tapped a slow rhythm against the table. Outside, a teller flipped the closed sign to open. The vault door buzzed faintly. "She told me once," I continued, "they'd never find it before I did." He looked up, something flickering in his gaze. "I remember," he said slowly. "Helen had this private paranoia about Greg's ambition. She asked questions quietly. I thought it was grief, or maybe pride. But she came in alone once. Paid cash for a new deposit box. I wasn't allowed to log it in the family file." I nodded toward the back of the room. "Can we open it?" He hesitated, then pulled a worn key from his pocket. "She gave me a duplicate. Said if anything ever happened to her and you came asking, I should let you in." He stood. We walked together to the vault. A staff member verified my ID, Daniel's credentials, then led us to box 1937. Daniel inserted the key and turned it with a quiet click. The drawer slid open. Inside, a stack of envelopes neatly bound in string. On top, a blue folder labeled in Helen's handwriting, "Emily for when they forget what's right." Daniel placed it gently on the table and opened it. The first document was a notarized letter addressed to both of us. "If you're reading this, something has gone wrong." I never trusted the way Greg talked about legacy, like it was his alone. This trust was meant to protect both my grandchildren. If changes were made after my passing, they were not mine. "Emily, you've always been the one who sees the cracks. Don't let them seal you out." Underneath, the original trust document, signed and witnessed, clearly listing equal division of assets between Ryan and me. A handwritten note from Helen was clipped to it, outlining concerns that Greg had pressured her into signing a draft revision she never finalized. Then another paper. A single-page spreadsheet. Daniel's breath caught. "What is it?" I asked. "This is an allocation schedule," he murmured. "It shows that $50,000 from the inheritance account was moved without authorization 2 weeks after Helen died, into a shell account under your father's company." He looked up at me, his eyes sharper now. This wasn't sloppy accounting. It was deliberate. I said nothing. My hands rested calmly on the edge of the table. "Greg rewrote the trust. After her death, Daniel said more to himself than to me. That's illegal. And if this spreadsheet was pulled from the trust fund account, it means he had help. Someone internal." He reached for the last document in the box, a business card folded in half. Inside a password. Underneath it, just one sentence in Helen's handwriting: "Don't confront until you're ready. Build first, then burn it down." Daniel sat back, visibly shaken. "I didn't want to believe she was right," he said. "But this changes everything." I leaned forward. "Will you help me?" He didn't answer right away. He studied the pages, then closed the folder and handed it to me. "You've got more than a case," he said quietly. "You've got a reckoning." Truth, when printed on paper, makes a louder noise than a scream. My hotel room looked like a war zone, only instead of blood, it was paper. Receipts, notarized letters, scanned bank transfers, annotated trust documents, highlighted PDFs. Everything from Greg's silent betrayal to Sylvia's complicit nods was now visible, cold and in my hands. Daniel's words echoed as I reread Helen's letter. "You've got a reckoning." I'd brought every document from the vault, every screenshot, every downloaded transaction into this quiet space above downtown Eugene. The overhead light flickered. I didn't bother to call the front desk. My mind was louder than the electricity anyway. My laptop hummed. A folder titled Proof Final blinked on the desktop. Inside, 37 files organized chronologically, 7 years of erased loyalty. 7 years of funding my parents' crises while they plotted my erasure. The phone buzzed. "Daniel." I've reviewed everything he said, breathless, his voice no longer cautious. "This is bigger than I expected." How much bigger, I asked. The forged signature on the business loan, that alone could lead to criminal charges. But the inheritance withdrawal, the trust alteration. That's felony-level fraud, Emily. My hand gripped the edge of the table. "You're sure I was Helen's legal counsel? The copy you brought from the vault, that's the final binding version of the trust. Anything Greg submitted later was fabricated." I swallowed. "What happens if I challenge it? It goes to probate. But if we preempt with a cease and desist and show intent to escalate legally, Greg might fold to avoid exposure." I didn't answer immediately. "Emily," he said more gently, "you're not imagining this. You're not overreacting. You have grounds legally and morally." After we hung up, I stared at my phone until the screen went dark. A few seconds later, it rang again. "Michael." "You okay?" he asked. "No," I said, "but I'm focused." He exhaled. "You don't need their permission to take back what's yours." I blinked. What if they spin it? Make me look greedy, vindictive. Then let them. You're not doing this for image, you're doing it for truth. And for peace. Peace. That word tasted foreign. I opened a notebook, the same one I'd used for budget calculations in college. In it, I started tracing the timeline. 2016. I paid off Dad's back taxes. 2017, co-signed the renovation loan on the lake house. 2018, Ryan's startup launch, $8,000 pulled from Helen's trust. 2019, paid Mom's medical bill after her dental emergency. 2020, no one called me on my birthday. 2021, found out secondhand that Greg promoted Ryan at the company. 2022, got engaged. No congratulations. Everything overlapped. Every omission lined up with a theft. I wasn't just written out, I was systematically drained. I reached for a fresh Word document. Subject: transfer termination notice. I typed the opening line to Greg and Sylvia. Effective immediately, I am initiating a legal review of all trust-related transactions following Helen Whitaker's passing. I stopped. My finger hovered over the send button. Not yet. It wasn't the right time, not because I wasn't ready, but because the storm needed to hit at the right velocity. There would be no warnings. I saved the draft. Closed the laptop. My phone buzzed again, this time a message from Daniel. It was a photo. A scanned document. The original trust papers, signed and notarized with my name clearly listed beside Ryan's as co-beneficiary. No edits, no ambiguity. Underneath the image, his text read, "Found it." Dated 4 weeks before Helen passed. It was altered after she died. "You're in." fully. I stared at the screen. The paper never lied. But now I had the proof that would finally make them listen. The first strike wasn't loud, but it hit where it hurt. I sipped black coffee from a chipped ceramic mug while my laptop glowed coldly under the dim lights of a cafe that had probably seen 100 failed novels written at its corner tables. This wasn't fiction. This was war. Outside, Eugene was drenched in November. Gray, wet leaves clung to sidewalks, the morning sluggish with drizzle. I liked the anonymity of this place. No one knew me here, and that gave me the freedom to become unrecognizable even to myself. I opened the secure portal to Greg's company account. He once made me the emergency contact for quarterly wire authorizations back when I was the responsible one. Back when my name meant nothing more to him than efficiency. Big mistake. I scrolled past the familiar numbers: $1 and $200 recurring to a consulting partner, $800 auto debit to Ryan's marketing platform, $2,500 scheduled monthly for family maintenance fund. That was the code name for me, apparently the role I never agreed to play. Click, cancel, pause. Every future transfer flagged, every automation unwound. Greg wouldn't know yet. Not until the first denial email hit his inbox. Then I opened another tab: Equifax. The forged loan had been submitted under my maiden name, attached to my SSN tied to a dormant checking account I hadn't used since grad school. Daniel's assistant had traced the account routed through one of Greg's shell firms under the guise of equipment leasing. I uploaded proof: dates, IP addresses, a scanned image of the signature I never wrote. Suspected identity theft. Fraudulent loan guarantee. Suspected forgery by a known relative. Submitted. Then I logged into ProtonMail, an account I hadn't touched in 3 years. There, I composed 2 emails addressed to names I remembered from old board meeting transcripts Greg used to leave lying around after too many glasses of bourbon. Internal names. Quiet ones. 2. Redacted. GregWhitakerHoldings.com. Subject: urgent inquiry regarding trust revisions and legal compliance. Dear Mr. Brandt, I am reaching out with concern over recent modifications made to the Whitaker Trust in the months following Helen Whitaker's passing. Certain signatures, financial transactions, and legal actions raise questions of compliance and fiduciary breach. Please note this is not a formal legal notice, not yet, but silence will be interpreted accordingly. Regards, Emily Whitaker. Repeat to a second recipient with modified language. Send. Encrypt. I closed the lid. That was the first cut. No fireworks, no outbursts. Just quiet sabotage. Surgical. Precise. I wanted them to wonder what was happening, to feel it before they saw it. Greg always said business is war. You win by moving before they even know there's a board. I remembered. He just forgot I'd been listening. Hours later, my phone buzzed. Sylvia. I watched it vibrate twice before silencing it. No voicemail, just a missed call and a mother's name still saved for now. A small part of me expected a follow-up text. Nothing came. No apology. No demand. Just absence. And that absence roared louder than any accusation. I spent the evening reviewing my dossier again, highlighting inconsistencies, updating the chronology. Everything that once felt too emotional was now documented, coded, quantified. Late into the night, just as I was about to shut everything down, a new email notification appeared. The subject line was clinical, from AssistantYgHoldings.com. Subject: internal records update, trust documents. Ms. Whitaker, per Mr. Whitaker's directive, your name has been formally removed from all internal trust documentation effective today. No greeting, no explanation. I read it twice. Then I smiled. Too late. Every lie has a reflection. It just takes the right light to reveal it. The building was sleeker than I remembered: steel and glass trying too hard to look like innovation. The kind of place where people wore hoodies with $1,000 watches, where beanbags passed as chairs and hustle culture was a religion. Ryan once called it his empire in progress, but the sign bearing the startup's name had been replaced months ago. Someone else's dream now rented the space. I didn't come here for nostalgia. Jenna met me near the elevator. She looked older, not aged, but hardened. Her expression was cautious, not unfriendly. She wore a navy jacket and had a coffee in hand that she never drank. "Emily Whitaker," she said flatly. "Didn't expect you to reach out." I figured as much. We sat in the corner booth of the lobby cafe. Jenna glanced around, then leaned in. "I got your email," she said. Honestly, I almost ignored it. But something about the way you wrote. It felt clean. Not like a trap. "I'm not here to trap anyone," I replied. "Just to trace what was taken." She tapped her fingers against her cup. "You want to know how it started?" I nodded. Ryan had the idea, sort of. But Greg was the one who pulled the strings. Said he wanted to help his son become a CEO, learn responsibility. Then he started funneling money in, not through a formal investment, but like family handouts. "Was that money ever documented?" I asked. "Only vaguely. 10,000 at first, then more, all from what Greg called legacy support. He said it was family money and that Ryan didn't need to know the details. And I built the tech," she said. "I did the pitches." But when the platform failed, Greg asked me to sign an NDA, said it was for my protection. "Was there anything else? A formal agreement, ownership split?" Jenna reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. "This is my copy of the original registration," she said. "Your name's on it too, as co-founder." My stomach twisted. "That's impossible," I said. I know," she cut in. "Your name was added later. I didn't question it at the time, thought maybe you were a silent backer. But look at the timestamp. December 23rd, 2019, the day I was home for Christmas. I'd signed nothing. I'd barely spoken to Greg that entire week. That's a forged signature," I said, staring at the line that bore my name. Jenna watched me. "I always thought something was off. You were never at meetings, but Greg made it sound like you were too busy with your Wall Street job to get involved." "Because I was. I didn't even know this existed." "Well," she said, "now you do." She handed over a second sheet, a signed statement. "I, Jenna Marks, certify that I co-founded Enlace Ventures with Ryan Whitaker. I was approached by Greg Whitaker, who offered to fund the company under informal terms. Emily Whitaker's name was added to registration documents without her involvement. I was later pressured to sign an NDA." I looked at her. "Why? Help me now." "Because I Googled your name this morning," she said, "and I don't like being attached to a lie. Especially not one that used my reputation to cover Greg's ass." I tucked the papers into my folder, heart pounding. This wasn't just about stolen money anymore. This was theft of identity, integrity, intention. Later that evening, I cross-referenced the $8,000 taken from Helen's trust. The withdrawal date matched perfectly 2 days before that forged registration. Greg had funneled the money through a fake joint venture disbursement attaching my name to a company I'd never seen to fund a son who had no idea how many strings were being pulled in his name. Ryan once joked, "You're the smart one, Em. I'm just the charming distraction." He had no idea how true that was. I opened a new email to Daniel. The subject line was blunt: 3 strikes. "We now have forged financial docs, a co-founder witness, and trust fraud. How far do you want to take this?" His reply came less than 5 minutes later. "All the way." I expected denial. What I got was war. The email hit my inbox at 9:12 a.m. Subject line: immediate action required. The sender: a partner at my father's corporate law firm, a name I recognized from Christmas parties, the kind of man who shook your hand too long and smiled with too many teeth. The document attached was formal, cold, and sharp as a scalpel. A cease and desist. They were accusing me of unauthorized access and distribution of confidential financial documents related to Whitaker and Sons Holdings. A particularly bold line alleged I had manipulated protected material for purposes of destabilizing family assets. I almost laughed. This wasn't denial, it was offense, and it carried my father's fingerprints all over it. 10 minutes later, my phone rang. Greg. I didn't answer. It rang again, and again. On the third try, I picked up. "You've made a serious mistake," he said, voice low and falsely calm. "You think you're entitled to tear this family apart because of a few miscommunications, a few disagreements. I have legal proof," I replied evenly. "Multiple types. I've spoken to counsel." He exhaled harshly. "Don't play lawyer, Emily. You don't know the game. You forged my signature." It was a formality, he snapped. "And you benefited. Where do you think your job interviews came from, your tuition? You think any of that happened without me laying the groundwork?" I closed my eyes. "I funded my education." "You owe this family more than you'll ever repay," he growled. "And if you think you can weaponize legacy against blood, you've already lost." Before I could respond, he hung up. I sat still for a long time. Then came the second strike, a voice message from Sylvia. Soft, syrupy, laced with fake concern. "Emily, sweetheart. I know Greg can be intense. But this isn't you. Let's not ruin the holidays over documents and old misunderstandings. Call me okay, old misunderstandings." The word echoed like poison in a wine glass. I opened a new message and typed only one sentence to both Greg and Sylvia. "My attorney has everything, including your forged loan." Then I BCC'd Daniel. By mid-afternoon, I was sitting in a conference room at my Boston firm, the one we used for sensitive client work, paneled in dark wood, soundproofed like a vault. Daniel called in via secure line. He didn't waste time. "I've reviewed the cease and desist," he said. "It's aggressive but empty. Classic intimidation. What they don't know is how deep your documentation goes. They're hoping I blink. They're hoping you still see them as family," he corrected. "But they've made this a legal dispute and you're not a child anymore." He cleared his throat. "Given the forged signature, trust tampering, and fraudulent filings, I've drafted a formal notice. If they don't settle, we proceed to arbitration. You'll win. Possibly even criminal charges if you choose to go that far." I swallowed. I want the truth on record, and I want my name cleared. Then we do this right. That night, as the city lights painted soft squares across my apartment walls, my laptop pinged with a new message, encrypted, from Daniel. The subject line read, "From Helen, final recordings." My breath caught. It took 3 passwords and a 2-factor authentication sequence to open the file. The audio was low-aged, and then I heard her voice, my grandmother's, clear and unwavering. "This is for Emily. Only her. No one else." I made one final wire, not of money, but of intent. At 9:04 a.m., the formality was done. My signature slid across the page like a blade. The notary blinked, then nodded. I had just removed every cosign authorization, every lingering tie that allowed Greg or Sylvia to touch anything tied to my name. My credit accounts frozen. Bank alerts active. Fraud claims filed. A sleek black folder now held the end of their access to my life. Daniel's voice crackled through the speakerphone on my desk. "That's everything. You're legally insulated. They'll feel it by noon." I looked out at the Boston skyline, the sun-warming glass towers that held no memory of Oregon or of me. That, I realized, was the point. My life didn't need their approval to be valid. It never had. "Are we still on for the meeting?" I asked. "Confirmed. 10:00 a.m. tomorrow. I'll handle the boardroom setup. But Emily, be ready. They'll try everything." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Everything was clean, crisp, final. Until the knock came. It was soft, hesitant. Not the kind you expect at a business tower entrance without an appointment. I opened the office door, and there he stood, Ryan. his hands in the pockets of an overpriced jacket, eyes darting as if unsure how to look me in the face. "Can we talk?" he asked. I stepped aside but didn't smile. He sat awkwardly across from me, scanning the office like it was a museum exhibit. I I didn't know," he said after a moment. "Not everything, I swear. I didn't say anything, but I didn't ask either," he admitted, looking down. "I guess I didn't want to know. That's closer to the truth." He nodded, biting the inside of his cheek like a child waiting for punishment. "Greg said everything was handled. Said Helen wanted things this way." I reached into my desk and pulled out the neatly bound 7-page dossier I'd been updating since the night in Eugene. I handed it to him across the table. "You should read what you benefited from." He took it with trembling fingers. "Are you going to destroy him?" "No," I said. "I'm going to stop him." He opened his mouth like he wanted to say more but thought better of it. And then he left. I didn't feel relief. Just clarity. A few hours later, Michael arrived, no text, no warning. Just him and a bouquet of burnt orange calla lilies in one hand and 2 coffees in the other. He set both down, kissed my forehead, and sat without a word. "They know," I said. "I figured. I'm done asking. Tomorrow it ends. No more silence." He nodded and gently placed his hand over mine. "Whatever happens in that room, you already won." The sun dipped low, throwing long golden lines across the floor. Back in my hotel room that night, I took one last look at the printed trust documents, the screenshots, the scanned affidavit from Jenna, and the audio file of Helen's voice. The war wasn't about dollars anymore. It never had been. It was about erasure. And I had rewritten myself back into the record. I opened my inbox to check for Daniel's confirmation. There it was. Subject: boardroom confrontation scheduled. Nov 30, 10:00 a.m. Attendees: Greg Whitaker, Sylvia Whitaker, Ryan Whitaker, Emily Whitaker, Daniel Herschel, Legal Counsel, Whitaker and Sons Board. Liaison: Emily opens her inbox. Daniel has scheduled a boardroom confrontation with Greg, Sylvia, Ryan, and legal counsel for 10:00 a.m. sharp. Truth, when spoken plainly, doesn't just echo. It detonates. The boardroom smelled of varnished oak and stale tension. A pot of untouched coffee sat sweating in the corner next to a plate of shortbread no one would eat. I walked in 5 minutes early, leather folder in hand, pulse steady but deliberate like I'd practiced. Because I had. Greg was already seated at the head of the long table, fingers steepled, face carved from stone. Sylvia sat beside him, her mouth drawn into a line too polite to be called a frown. Ryan lingered near the window, eyes fixed on nothing in particular. And then there were the 2 legal observers, polite in their neutrality, and Daniel's voice waiting on the speakerphone. I placed the folder down. The thud was soft, but it split the silence. "I'll begin," I said. Greg's nostrils flared. "You're not a shareholder. Neither are you." Daniel's voice cut in. "Not legally." "Let her speak." I opened the folder and removed the first page, a spreadsheet printed on crisp white paper, each line item shaded in gray. The numbers were indisputable. Transfer dates, account references, amounts. A ledger that had once been hidden in shadows, now exposed in daylight. Over the last 7 years I transferred $42,000 to my parents' personal accounts. Some labeled temporary assistance, some blank. None returned. No one spoke. I laid the second sheet down. $8,000 was siphoned from Helen Whitaker's estate, which she intended for my education. Instead, it funded a failed venture under my brother's name. Sylvia blinked, not in shock, but calculation. Then I pressed the third page flat, the forged co-signature. "This is a document submitted in my name to secure a business loan I never authorized for a company I never agreed to back. Time-stamped during a Christmas visit I barely survived." I paused, not for drama, but breath. Then I tapped my phone, connecting it to the room's Bluetooth speaker. Helen's voice spilled into the air. warm, certain. This is for Emily. Only her. No one else. There it was. The detonator. Sylvia's hand tightened around her cup. Greg's face remained unmoved, but I saw the tension shift in his jaw. Daniel's voice resumed. We've reviewed the original trust. It was altered after Helen's death without probate notification or beneficiary approval. That constitutes a legal breach. I didn't sit. I didn't blink. I had rehearsed this moment not out of vengeance but necessity. You erased me on paper, I said, voice low but clear. I made sure you couldn't erase the truth. Silence. No rebuttal, just the sterile hum of the AC kicking in. Greg finally leaned forward, eyes narrowing like a hawk forced to stare at the ground. You'll regret this. I looked him in the eye. I already did. Not anymore. Sometimes the crown doesn't fall. It's yanked off. The marble floor of the hearing room felt colder than it should have in December. Chairs lined the space in stiff rows, a raised dais at the front, where the audit officials sat with tablets and files, the seal of the state etched into the wood behind them. I sat to the right, Daniel beside me. Across from us were Greg and Sylvia, dressed like they still held authority, but now it looked like costume. The room buzzed with whispers. A few journalists sat in the back row. This wasn't a criminal trial, not yet, but it was public. And everything said today would be recorded. An official cleared his throat. This hearing will review allegations of trust mismanagement, unauthorized alteration of legal documents, and misappropriation of inherited funds. Greg shifted in his chair. His suit, tailored and expensive, suddenly looked too tight. We'll begin with the trust records, the moderator said. Ms. Whitaker. I stood, notes in hand, but I didn't read them. I looked directly at Greg and Sylvia. After my grandmother passed, I was told the trust was rebalanced. I accepted that until I found out my signature had been used fraudulently to secure loans and transactions I never consented to. My share of the inheritance was rerouted. When I asked questions, I was dismissed. A clerk handed over notarized papers, spreadsheets, the forensic audit Daniel had commissioned. I didn't have to say much. The evidence had already spoken. Do you have anything to add? The moderator asked. Greg stood slowly. My daughter is confused. This was never theft. It was family management. I simply prioritized what made the most sense for the business. He gestured toward Ryan, who sat near the back, pale and tense. And you, Mrs. Whitaker. The panel turned to Sylvia. She crossed one leg over the other and smoothed the hem of her skirt. Emily's been distant for years. We thought she wanted nothing to do with us. We did what was necessary to protect the estate. To protect it from your own daughter, the moderator asked, his tone sharp. Sylvia didn't answer. Ryan raised his hand. I'd like to say something. All eyes turned. I didn't know about the forged papers, he said. But I should have asked. I should have paid attention. I thought she was just cold. I didn't realize how much you two buried her. Sylvia looked like she'd been slapped. The panel continued for another hour, reviews of documents, quiet gasps from the audience, legal terms none of us liked to hear. When it ended, the summary was swift. Greg would be removed from control of the family company pending further investigation. Sylvia would be stripped of co-signatory rights for the Whitaker Trust. State-level fraud investigation would proceed into document forgery and misuse of funds. Daniel leaned close. We just collapsed their entire platform. Outside the hearing room, Greg didn't look at me. Sylvia tried. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Later that day, we sat in Daniel's office drinking lukewarm coffee and replaying the moments in our heads. It wasn't joy I felt, not even relief, just stillness. The silence that comes after a storm breaks every window. Then my phone buzzed. University Scholarship Board, the caller ID read. I stepped out to take it. Ms. Whitaker, the woman's voice was warm. We're fast-tracking approval. The board has unanimously agreed to name the new equity scholarship after your grandmother, the Helen Whitaker Endowment. I closed my eyes. It wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Silence, once a prison, had now become my sword. The apartment was still. The kind of quiet you don't hear but feel like air finally allowed to exhale. Outside, Boston shimmered in muted December sunlight, the city already wound down for the weekend. Inside, my apartment smelled of roasted coffee and linen, the scent of ownership, not obligation. Michael stood by the kitchen island barefoot, flipping through a printout for a winter getaway. He looked at me like I was already somewhere lighter, freer. Maybe I was. I sat on the floor, laptop open, 2 mugs within reach, and a stack of old paper files, now reduced to one slim folder marked Archive. Not for memory's sake, just documentation. I logged into my bank accounts and cleared the last of the joint notifications. No more shared financial alerts. No emergency backup lines. I canceled the legacy co-insurance policy my father once insisted I maintain just in case. There would be no more just in case. From the drawer, I pulled out the final document. Daniel had drafted, a formal notarized withdrawal from the Albright family trust. I placed it in a certified mail envelope addressed to Greg and Sylvia. The words were cold, but not cruel. I will not participate in a structure built on erasure. You may keep the walls. I've taken the foundation. I sealed the letter and set it by the door. Michael glanced up. You sure never been more. That afternoon, Ryan's name popped into my inbox. For a moment, my stomach tightened, instinctual, protective. But the subject line read, "No excuses. Just this." His message wasn't long. "Emily, I don't expect forgiveness. And I know silence has probably protected you more than my words ever could. But I read everything. Twice. You were right to do what you did. I didn't know the full extent. But I benefited from it, and I didn't question it. That's on me. You always protected yourself. And now you've protected the truth. If you ever want to talk, I'll listen. No defenses. Ryan." I stared at the screen. No anger. No dramatics. Just wait, the kind that didn't crush you but grounded you. I didn't respond. Not yet. Maybe never. Some bridges don't need fire. They just need to be left uncrossed. I updated my professional bio that evening, the one listed on our firm's leadership site. Bemily Albright, independent consultant, builder of boundaries. There was no need to mention Harvard or awards or the Whitaker Trust. Let them Google it if they cared. I had no desire to prove myself anymore. As dusk folded into the windows, I scrolled to the old group text thread labeled Family, the thread that once pinged with Greg's travel updates, Sylvia's passive-aggressive recipe links, Ryan's last-minute Venmo requests. I hovered for a second. Tap. Thread deleted. Just like that. Later, as Michael and I sat by the window wrapped in mismatched blankets and too much shared history, I opened the day's mail. Mostly junk. One white envelope hand-addressed. I frowned. No return address. Inside was a small card printed on heavy paper. A child's handwriting, careful, curved. Ms. Albright. You probably don't remember me. I was in your calculus review group 2 summers ago. You once told me, don't let someone else's ceiling become your floor. I didn't forget that. I got into Brown. Full scholarship. I want to be like you. Kayla M. I stared at the note for a long time, then placed it on my desk next to Helen's letter. For all that had been taken, some things, the right things, had found a way back. Not through noise, through presence, through proof. And silence, wielded right, had finally spoken. Legacy isn't about what you're given. It's about what you build from what was taken. The glass-walled venue shimmered in the afternoon light, the Charles River a gentle silver ribbon behind it. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the December air carried a quiet weight, like the city itself was holding its breath for something new. Inside, voices buzzed, soft laughter, camera shutters, the rustle of program leaflets. I stood near the podium, fingers curled loosely around a small brass key, the same kind Helen once kept on a hook above her spice rack, right next to the cinnamon she only used on birthdays. It had unlocked nothing grand, just a weathered drawer where she stored her ledgers, grocery receipts, and handwritten notes on saving 50 cents per jar by switching brands. Today, it opened something else. Michael stood off to the side, hands in his pockets, watching the room with quiet eyes. He didn't need to say anything. He never had to. His presence anchored me like gravity, invisible but sure. 5 young women sat in the front row, each with a deep red folder embossed with the gold seal of the Helen Albright Foundation. Their eyes were wide, nervous, eager. I recognized the expressions. I'd worn them once when I first stepped into an institution that didn't know what to make of my last name or my thrift store shoes. A representative from the university opened the ceremony with a polished smile and scripted praise. I barely heard it. Not from nerves, but from the hum inside my chest. Not anxiety, fulfillment. When it was my turn, I stepped behind the podium and let my breath catch. My grandmother, I began, voice steady, wasn't rich, but she was wealthy in defiance. She believed financial literacy wasn't just survival, it was power. She taught me to read interest rates before I could spell compound. She told me to keep my receipts not just for tax season, but for life. A soft chuckle rippled through the crowd. She gave me $15,000 when I was 17, not to spend, but to leverage. That seed became my degree. That degree became my voice. And now it becomes this. I gestured to the banner behind me, Helen Albright Foundation, Boundaries Build Futures. The first recipient, a girl named Liana, whose essay spoke of fixing broken plumbing between AP exams, stood and wiped her eyes. The others followed. Each one a mirror of something I once was. Each one now a different story waiting to begin. Photos of Helen lined the sidewall. Some formal, others candid, her gardening in old jeans, stirring soup, reading The Economist by lamplight. Her penmanship, the loops and tilts, had been etched into the brass nameplate on the main display. I opened the small glass case in the center of the room and placed the brass key inside, setting it on a velvet square beside a scanned copy of the original savings bond Helen had signed over to me. A card beside it read, "Boundaries, the key to inheritance." It wasn't for show, it was for permanence. The applause was soft at first, then swelled, not thunderous, but full, authentic. When I stepped down, Michael reached for my hand. Warm, steady. "That felt good," he whispered. It felt finished. A board member from the university approached as we moved toward the reception area. "Ms. Whitaker," he said, "we've been reviewing the structure. There's strong interest in expanding the program nationally. Would you be open to scaling it?" I didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." Helen's laugh echoed in memory, the one she used after giving advice, not waiting to see if you'd take it. This wasn't revenge. This wasn't victory. This was a beginning, built from the ashes of everything they tried to take. Some exits aren't escapes, they're arrivals. Boston was hushed under a velvet sky, streetlights casting golden halos over sidewalks dusted in frost. The Charles River reflected a city unwinding its surface, holding the shimmer of everything unspoken. We walked slowly, hands tucked into warm pockets, shoulders brushing. Michael didn't say much, and neither did I, not at first. The quiet between us wasn't empty. It was earned. He finally asked, "Do you miss them?" I didn't look up right away. The question wasn't cruel. It wasn't even curious. It was just necessary. "No," I said. "I miss who I thought they were." He nodded once, as if he knew the difference too well. Back home, the apartment glowed with soft light. A candle flickered on the windowsill. On the table next to a half-sipped mug of tea lay a postcard addressed in Ryan's familiar uneven scrawl. The front showed a photograph of Mount Hood at dusk, all slate blues and fading pinks. I turned it over. "Emily, Thank you for the mirror. It hurt, but I needed it. R. No return address. No apology either. But something better. Accountability. I tucked the postcard into Helen's old recipe book, the one with oil stains and budget notes scrawled in the margins. Then I picked up her photo, the one of her laughing flower dusted on her cheek, and placed it by the window facing east. She always believed in morning light, said it revealed who had something to hide and who had nothing left to fear. The room felt still, but not stagnant, more like a resting place for transformation. At my desk, the screen was still open to the document I'd spent 2 weeks crafting word by word, line by bruised line. Title: Unpaid Debts and Boundaries. It wasn't a manifesto. It wasn't a burn book. It was a ledger of a different kind, one that recorded value not stolen or assigned, but reclaimed. The cursor blinked at the top of the screen like it was daring me to hesitate. I didn't. Click. Send. A subtle thrill pulsed through my chest. Not adrenaline. Not relief. Ownership. The kind no signature could forge and no family could erase. A few minutes later, my inbox pinged. From Elena, or Haven Hill Publishing, subject: Unpaid Debts and Boundaries submission. Emily, let's talk. This is powerful. I stared at the message for a long moment, letting the full arc of it settle in my chest. Not the vindication, the authorship. I wasn't a cautionary tale. I was the narrator now. The one who kept the receipts, rewrote the terms, and turned silence into structure. No more exit wounds. Only arrivals.